Hi, my name's Rachel and today we have another Authors Behaving Badly. However, and I'm not joking, it's possible that the real culprit was an owl and not the author. We'll get there. Michael Peterson is an author and also he was convicted for killing his wife. He recently has been the subject of conversation again because HBO just released a fictionalized version of what happened to him starring Colin Firth and Toni Collette of the events that led him to being imprisoned. Before we get started, I have to sing thank you for being a friend. Travel down the road and back again. I have the urge to sing the whole thing. Anyway, to my patrons, thank you for being a friend. For those paying my therapy bills, Lex, SJ, Eric, Zachary, Jill, and Ella, thank you guys for the therapy. And to my potato starch Marxists, Allison, Carlin, Ebby, Kate, Katie O, Marcella, Molly, Paige, Reba, Shannon, Sean, Chris, Sarah, Jules, CJ, Aaron, Laura, Aiden, Greenmouth, Nicole, Elena, Hufflepunk, and Morgan. Thank you guys. I appreciate the support until the communist revolution comes. If you want to join my Patreon, the link is down below. You get early access and behind the scenes stuff. One of my patrons, Ebby, hi, said that she wanted me to make a video where I do behind the scenes for patrons of how I do my makeup, which I don't know how long y'all have been watching this channel, but I have been trying to learn to do makeup. I don't think I'm that good at it, but I definitely, I was looking at one of my old videos for purposes that will become clear in a couple weeks, and oh my god, the makeup, what was happening? Why didn't anyone say something? A betrayal to let me go out in public like that. I was just like, boop, 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 ta-da! Why? Anyway, she wanted me to make a video of behind the scenes of, how I do my makeup and also how I film, how I edit. So if my patrons are interested in that, I can make that a patrons only project that I do, just like how I did the patrons only bookshelf organization. Just let me know if y'all in the Patreon are interested in that and I will get started. Okay? Okay. Any other housekeeping? Oh, commissions for reviews of your own work or someone else's work. Still working on Ready Player One. My god, what a slog. Beta reading but also completed works commissions are in my coffee down below. Okay, cool. Michael Ivor Peterson was born near Nashville, Tennessee. He graduated from Duke University, and when he was at Duke, he was in a fraternity. Typical man's man, I guess. That's what happens when you're in a fraternity. I don't know anything about fraternities. He got a bachelor's degree in political science, but while there at Duke, he actually was the editor of the school newspaper. So that's kind of where it seems like he got his writing bug, where he was bit by the writing bug. So he was there in the mid-1960s. Then he goes on to University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill for law. He graduates and takes a civilian job with the Department of Defense, the U.S. Department of Defense. He was assigned to research arguments supporting the United States being in Vietnam. So great, fantastic. Our military involvement in Vietnam, which we all know worked out well for absolutely nobody. He at one point was stationed in Germany and married a woman named Patricia Sue, who was an elementary school teacher at the U.S. military base in Germany. Well, there's many, but one of them. They had two children, Clayton and Todd. And not a fun fact, but a fact nonetheless about Clayton. Clayton also went to Duke. And he, in his time at Duke, got a little upsetty spaghetti because they held him back due to a drunk driving charge. So after losing his fake ID, he breaks into a building at Duke to steal $1,700 worth of equipment so he could create a new fake ID for a trip to Myrtle Beach for spring break. And to distract from the theft, he rigged a pipe bomb that he says was not created to actually explode. Nonetheless, he lit the bomb, and on his way out, he left a note for the school's administrators, condemning the administrators for prohibiting beer kegs at parties. Anyway, he served 4 years in prison. Anyways, back to the other Peterson, who also went to prison. In 1968, the elder Peterson, OG Peterson, is not just working for the DoD, now he's been commissioned into the US Marine Corps and serves in the Vietnam War. And in 1971, he received an honorable discharge because he got into a car accident that left him with a permanent disability. Later, Peterson claimed that he had been awarded with a Silver Star, a Bronze Star, and 2 Purple Hearts. And he physically had these medals, which you can buy on the internet, but he didn't have the documents for them proving that they were his. He claimed that he received one Purple Heart after being hit by shrapnel when someone else stepped on a landmine, and that he received the other Purple Heart when he was shot, but then later admitted that the war injury was not as a result of him being in Vietnam. It was from the car accident. And journalists looked into this and they couldn't find any evidence of him ever being awarded a Purple Heart. So Peterson and his first wife Patricia live in Germany for a while with their two sons, Todd and Clayton. And they become friends with these two people named Elizabeth and George Ratliff. Elizabeth and George had two children, Margaret and Martha. George died, and the two families became even closer. And then Elizabeth also died. So after her death in 1985, Michael becomes the guardian for her two daughters, Margaret and Martha. And then Michael and Patricia divorce in 1987. Margaret and Martha immediately move with Michael to Durham, North Carolina, and Todd and Clayton eventually came to live with him as well. In 1989, Michael meets Kathleen Atwater, who has a daughter of her own, Caitlin. So they all move in together. They are this blended family, and Michael and Kathleen eventually marry in 1997. So Peterson starts to become a writer. He wrote 3 novels based around his experiences with the Vietnam War, The Immortal Dragon, A Time of War, and A Bitter Peace. He also co-wrote a biography called Charlie Two Shoes with a journalist named David Perlmutt, and then he also co-authored Operation Broken Reed with Arthur L. Boyd, and he went back to his roots of working as a newspaper writer and started to write columns for a local paper, the Herald Sun, where his columns became known for criticism of police and the district attorney in his area. The same district attorney who would later prosecute Peterson. Speaking of which, on December 9th, 2001, at their home in North Carolina, Michael calls 911 saying that he just found his wife Kathleen unconscious and that she probably fell down 15 to 20, I don't know, quote, stairs. Am I the only one who knows exactly how many stairs are in my house? Is that because my OCD and all the tapping I do? He later claimed that he had been outside by the pool and had come in at about 2:40 in the morning to find Kathleen at the foot of the stairs, and Peterson said that she must have fallen down the stairs after drinking alcohol and consuming Valium. And the toxicology report supported this, but her autopsy did not. The autopsy said that Kathleen had severe injuries to the top and the back of her head from a blunt object, consistent with like multiple blows from said object, and that she had died probably about 2 hours after getting those injuries to the top and back of her head. Initially, Kathleen's daughter Caitlin and her sister Candace both said Michael's innocent and he was publicly supported by them, but then Caitlin heard of her mom's autopsy report and changed her mind and said, I think Michael did it. Candace, unfortunately being a homophobe, heard that Michael was bisexual and possibly pursuing a relationship with a man outside of his marriage to Kathleen, and was like, Michael did it! And Candace was the one who actually presented the prosecution with an alleged murder weapon, which was a fireplace poker that she had actually given to them for Christmas. Peterson's defense team hired a forensic expert named Henry Lee, who testified that the blood spatter evidence at the scene was consistent with a fall down the stairs. The police disagreed. They said that the injuries were just not consistent with her falling down the stairs. There's no way that her falling down the stairs caused those injuries to the top and the back of her head. Peterson was the only person at the house, so he was charged with Kathleen's murder, and he pled not guilty. The medical examiner said that Kathleen died as a result of homicidal assault that was basically just the lacerations to her skull. She said that there were 7 injuries to the top and the back of her skull, and these lacerations caused Kathleen's death. The defense disagreed, saying that since there was not an underlying injury like a skull fracture and there was no hemorrhaging in her brain, that this was not the result of a homicidal assault. Unfortunately, the prosecution decided to take a homophobe approach, and they did bring up the fact that Peterson lied about military service, the medals were a lie, and they talked about his gay life that he kept secret because, of course, why not just not agree that bisexuality is a valid sexual orientation? Sure, let's just pretend that's not a thing. Prosecution tried to make the case that Kathleen had discovered that Peterson was attracted to men and involved in men, and that their marriage was on the rocks because of this. And they said that this was the motive, and that Kathleen had a $1.5 million life insurance policy. They believed that the assistant district attorney said that they believed that because Kathleen may have found out that her husband was bisexual, that she would have been embarrassed and humiliated, and therefore they got into an argument and Kathleen was murdered as a result. That is what the prosecution contended. The defense said that Kathleen actually knew and accepted Michael's bisexuality and that their marriage was fine, they were perfectly happy, and this was supported by their friends, their family, their children. So Kathleen's sister Candace said the murder weapon sounds like it could be the fireplace poker I got them for Christmas, so the prosecution went with this theory. It initially was missing from the house, but the prosecution found it and presented it at trial. But forensic testing proved that it had been untouched and unmoved too long to have been used in the murder. And a juror contacted after the trial said that the jury actually threw out the idea of the blowpoke as the murder weapon. However, before Peterson's trial, the North Carolina Durham, the place where he lived, court ordered the exhumation of, remember Elizabeth Ratliff, the lady whose children he took in after her death? They ordered her body be brought from Texas in for testing and a second autopsy in April of 2003. And the Durham medical examiner who had looked at Kathleen's body was also asked to look at Elizabeth's body. The defense counsel said they would rather have her body looked at by Texas medical examiners. Nonetheless, the body was moved from Texas to North Carolina, and come to find out, the medical examiner found enough evidence from the second autopsy to, along with new witness testimony, to instead rule Elizabeth Ratliff's death also a homicide. Because Elizabeth Ratliff in 1985 had also been found dead at the bottom of her staircase. At the time, it was said that her death was caused by intracerebral hemorrhage secondary to she had a blood disorder. She had been suffering severe headaches that had been persisting up until the time of her death. So the medical examiner said initially that she had suffered a hemorrhage and then she fell down the stairs and she died. That night, the Petersons had actually had dinner with Ratliff and her daughters, and Michael Peterson had stayed and helped put them to bed. And then the children's nanny discovered the body the next morning. So Peterson was the last person to see Elizabeth Ratliff alive. The prosecution didn't actually accuse Peterson of this being a murder. Instead, they just sort of introduced the evidence saying it's possible he knew how to fake a death this way. After one of the longest trials in North Carolina history, on October 10th of 2003, Michael Peterson was charged and found guilty of the murder of Kathleen. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. However, Michael Peterson walks around a free man today. He appealed a few times, appeals were denied. Also, there was the owl theory. What a hoot. I'm sorry, I had to. I'm sorry. In late 2009, a theory came about that Kathleen had been attacked by an owl outside, specifically a barred owl. She may have fallen after rushing inside after being attacked by this owl and could have been knocked unconscious by hitting her head at the bottom of the stairs. The owl theory was brought up by an attorney who was actually a neighbor of the Petersons who had been following the details. He looked at the North Carolina Bureau of Investigation report and found that there was an owl feather listed in the evidence. Michael Peterson's attorneys had said that the state's Bureau of Investigation found in like a lump of hair that was in Kathleen's hand a microscopic owl feather and a sliver of wood from a tree nearby. This hair was re-examined in September 2008 and 2 more small feathers were found. And according to their neighbor lawyer, if this evidence had been presented at trial, it would have, quote, materially affected their deliberation and therefore would have materially affected their ultimate verdict. The prosecution said that's fucking ridiculous. And the medical examiner who had examined Kathleen's body said it was unlikely that the wounds on Kathleen's scalp could have been made by an owl. However, Deborah Radish, the medical examiner, opinion was challenged by 3 separate experts in 2010. Sadly though, despite this evidence, no new trial was brought dependent on it. But Michael is free, so how? Duane Deaver was one of the principal witnesses brought against Michael Peterson for his work on blood spatter analysis, and the North Carolina SBI actually led an investigation against Duane, which resulted in his suspension. His report was done on many flawed cases. And Pollard, the same lawyer slash neighbor of the Petersons, filed affidavits to support, basically he wanted all of the records of Kathleen's autopsy turned over to Michael Peterson's attorneys. But the judge in the case told Pollard, the lawyer neighbor, you're not allowed to file any more motions on behalf of this case because you are not actually Michael Peterson's lawyer. So Michael Peterson's actual lawyer filed it. After an audit of a bunch of cases done by Duane Deaver, he was fired by the SBI. He had falsely represented evidence in 34 cases, their audit found. He had withheld negative results in 1 case that led to a man being in prison for 17 years. He had claimed that he had worked on like 500 cases and been mentored by a particular person and had certain credentials. Turns out he was lying about all of that. He took a 2-day training course in the 1980s and had testified in 4 cases, Peterson's being the 3rd case. So any evidence that Deaver had given would be inadmissible in a new trial. Peterson was actually released to house arrest in 2011, and then in 2017 he submitted an Alford plea, which is a guilty plea entered because sufficient evidence exists to convict him of the defense, but the defendant asserts innocence. And so instead his charge was voluntary manslaughter. So the judge sentenced him to 86 months in prison, but by that time he had already served more than the sentence, so he didn't face additional prison time. So basically the charge of murder is gone, and now on his record it says voluntary manslaughter. He served prison time. Financially, this was pretty devastating for Peterson, this whole ordeal. And him being a writer, you know, you would think that, oh, he's gonna capitalize on what happened to him. Yeah, well, he would have. Caitlin, Kathleen's biological daughter, filed a wrongful death suit against Michael. They settled in 2007 for $25 million, but it's possible that Michael never paid the full amount because of the trial and how much financial strain that caused. And then after his release in 2017, Caitlin's lawyer filed another complaint against him to discourage him from making any sort of money off of the case. He did end up actually writing 2 books about the whole ordeal, Behind the Staircase in 2019 and Beyond the Staircase in 2020, but he doesn't make any money off of those. He donates it all to charity. He also wrote a book called Santa's Pandemic Cruise. The pandemic has changed things all over the world, even at the North Pole. Santa decides to take some people from the village and go on a cruise. Not everyone agrees with this, but they go along and try to get him back to the North Pole in time for Christmas. Apparently, it's about climate change and the COVID pandemic. So, alright. Okay, alright. I don't have anything else to say about that. I've got nothing. And you might have seen that there's both a Netflix series and a fictionalized HBO movie about this entire ordeal. Peterson is livid with both of the creators of those things. De Lestrade was the creator of the Netflix documentary series on this, and Antonio Campos created the HBO movie. De Lestrade, who created the Netflix documentary series, actually got money from the Antonio Campos HBO movie. Michael Peterson is really unhappy about all of this. He said De Lestrade released his archive to Campos, who then created a fictional account of events, most of which trashed me, which I really don't care about, and my children, which I really do care about. There are egregious fabrications and distortions of truth in the HBO series, well beyond what may be considered artistic license. He continues saying, he, De Lestrade, is the individual responsible for what happened to us, and while I am sorely pissed at Campos for all the liberties he took with the truth and for stealing from my book Behind the Staircase, the only source for his prison scenes, and for which I was, of course, not compensated, I am angrier at Jean De Lestrade, who should have had our interest in mind when he sold our story. I have no sympathy for him. De Lestrade was also upset about the Campos series because he was portrayed in it. I have no sympathy for him any more than I would for a hooker who contracted an STD after peddling her ass. Sounds harsh, but look at the result to our family for what he did. Sir, listen, I was with you until you decided to do some whorephobia. I was with you until you decided to slut shame. So you've lost me again. May an owl attack you for the whorephobia. That's what I have to say about that. Have you read his book about Santa and COVID? Do you think that he murdered his wife and the other woman? I think that, I don't know, but I hope that their families are doing okay. I can't imagine going through this and then having this depicted twice is just really awful. I really feel terrible for the Ratliff girls. Like imagine going through all that and having this moment where you're like wondering, did my adopted father murder my mother? And my, you know, my new adopted mother died the same way. I just imagine having to go through all that. That sounds like incredibly painful. Let me know if you think the owl did it, I guess, which I just, the owl theory is just so, this took so many twists and turns. This is one of those where it's very similar to like the Tucker Reed case, where I'm just like, this took so many turns that I did not expect it taking. All right. Anyway, let me know what you thought in the comments below. Like and subscribe, leave your thoughts, and thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.